Thanks, Amy. And good evening, good afternoon. I feel like the Truman Show now. Good morning, wherever you are. Thank you everyone for joining us. I can see some people here I know very well joining us, and huge thanks to Leading Your International School, to Jane and to Andre, and of course to Amy, for giving us this opportunity to talk this evening or today about what it is to work in an international school, and some tips, hopefully lots of practical things as well. And as Amy said, for people to join in and Q&A and lots of things. Hopefully we can get a good discussion. There's a huge range of experiences here from all sorts of different international education backgrounds, different parts of the world, and hopefully we can all share something as well as we go through. So the agenda this evening, we're going to look at what it's like to work in an international school, what you can expect, the role of an international school teacher, some of the skills and behaviours, choosing the right school and location, which I imagine for many people is really important and a priority, what you might expect to earn, because let's face it, we all need a salary, how to prepare yourself. I think for all of us around this screen, that will bring some interesting responses and answers. Can you ever prepare yourself completely? And where you begin your search. Obviously, we're supported by TIC today. Thanks, Amy. Let's move on to our first. Okay. So what does it mean to work internationally? The types of international schools there are, what can you expect from working in an international school, and why work in an international school? Alex and John, I'm really grateful because I know you've got a wealth of experience between you two and myself as well, and people here. Alex, what does it mean to work internationally?
So from my side, I think working internationally is to do with obviously a diversity of students and teachers that you get to work with, but also in terms of the type of school that you're more likely to work in is slightly different in terms of it could be that they're more business minded than necessarily what we could be accustomed to if you're in the UK, across Europe, or wherever that may be. And so the expectations that come with working in those types of schools also differ slightly. But the one thing that I would say from my side of working internationally in terms of just the range of students and cultural backgrounds and diversity you get to come across and work with and learn about in sort of your day-to-day teaching, as it were, and the different types of things that means you can bring into the classroom and experience yourself. So from my side, it isn't just about what you're going to do and teach and deliver to the students. It's also that ability to take something else from it yourself and develop and grow in terms of understanding of culture, but also from a professional standpoint as well.
Thanks, Alex. Joe, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I think you hit on a really good point there, Alex, about the kind of, the majority of schools internationally are profit-making schools, which is something that maybe you're not used to, particularly if you're coming from the UK or you're coming from Europe and you're working in state schools. And that does then change the environment that you're working in massively, because marketing is a huge part of the school that you're in, and certainly it's something I never thought of, when I first went into the international circuit, and suddenly there's cameras everywhere and there's this and that, and it does change things drastically, because essentially providing a service, I think the parental expectations upon that then are very, very different. That said, it's not necessarily a bad thing, that when we talk about parental expectations, for example, the amount of support you get from parents, because they're paying these fees, they want their best for their children, they're investing in their education, and so it is a very different working relationship with the different parties that are involved in a child's education. I think it's different, not necessarily worse in any way. I think there's a lot of positives to it, but I think the cultural aspect of it as well, learning about somewhere new, getting to meet new people, it's magic, and you should never ever turn away from it at all.
I like that. I think we have this discussion a lot in some of the groups I work in, and the idea of what is an international school, and if you put the word international in your school name, does that make you international? And trying to sort of just break down, I think there was an ISC report, 13,000 plus schools around the world would claim they're international based on their curriculum, based on their student body, based on their sort of culture and vision. And I think one of the important things is this, it sounds like a generic title because we like to polarize things and put things in nice binary, neat packages, but obviously the international school market is really, really diverse in every sense of the word, and people really have to do their homework, as we'll look at as we go through this seminar. A little bit about what to expect then. We had a little bit of conversation at the start. Alex, what should people expect when they work in an international school? You talked about diversity, some different things in terms of perhaps the parents, the expectations, a business. What else would we expect from an international school that might be different, say, from the UK, and certainly people come from the state system?
It was interesting. I had this conversation with a colleague of mine previously because they said, "Oh, I imagine in terms of languages," and it's like, yeah, we have almost over 40 different nationalities. But then this discussion went further on. It said, but you'll get that if you're accustomed to working in a city in the UK, actually that language and the nationalities and that you have that within those systems anyway. So sometimes there's a misconception. You assume that actually you're going to get more, and you don't. I think it's actually a case of you might get some different ones that maybe you've not come across before, but the diversity and the different languages and the cultures, it's actually not too dissimilar if you're accustomed to working within the state school. One of the things I think that is probably the biggest difference that I found working, and what I still struggle to get my head around, is the timing of the day. We are in school from 7 a.m. Generally as teachers, and I know teachers that are in there much earlier, and yet we will still finish, depending on the contract, but we still finish, teaching at 3:30, but you could still be there 4 till 4:30. And one of the things that I found that is the biggest difference, and in some ways is a really good selling point, but also is a time burden sometimes on teachers, is ECAs. There is that expectation from parents, and because it's most of the schools from where I am as well, they're all fee paying. So extracurricular activities are a big thing. And again, being able to offer something additional as a teacher, so whether it's a sport, music, clubs, that's the biggest thing in terms of the time of your day. It isn't the sandy beaches and sunshine that everyone always makes it out to be.
This is why they all wanted to find out.
Yeah. I mean, it's that. And don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm obviously based in Dubai, so our benefit is that on a Friday we have a half day. We only work till 12 o'clock. So, and in parts of the UAE, so for example, Sharjah, then they're on a 4-day work week. Wow. But then the thing with that is they have to cram the curriculum into 4 days. So you might find that your school day, your teaching day goes till 5:30. So looking at the school, looking at the location, looking at actually what's your curriculum, what's your school day like, becomes quite important, because they're all slightly different. Then ECAs come into it, and they're great because, again, you might work with students that you wouldn't necessarily teach. So for me as a scientist, I'm also a rugby coach, so I've done that, and then I might offer esports as something else. So you really get that creativity and the ability to work with different students that you might not necessarily teach. So it's positives in one way, but it's also something to be aware of, that the expectation to be able to offer and do and have those things is always going to be there.
Anna and I we were in a school in East London the other month, Kingsford School. Anna, I think there are about 40 different languages in that school in East London that you and I went to for the Global School Alliance conference we spoke at. And so, Alex, you're right. Sometimes diversity, it can actually be quite monoglot. In Moldova, I'm finding that English unifies all the differences between Russian and Romanian, and I find myself in a very strange position saying, if you don't speak English in a Cambridge class, you won't be able to be in a Cambridge class. And my Welsh ancestry shudders inside me at this idea of saying this. Joe, Alex said there about beaches and sort of cocktails at 4 o'clock. Do you think there's an expectation that people might think an international school career, or with just straight into the worst territory,
I mean,
probably.
school that offers me cocktails and beaches at 4 o'clock every day. I'm there, totally. I think people need to take into consideration is the different licenses that schools have. And you raised a good point before about, having international in the title doesn't necessarily mean just that. And particularly, I mean, I'm drawn upon China here. I've just spent the last 10 years in China. And, there's a very particular licensing around schools there. So you have bilingual schools which offer the local curriculum, so the Chinese national curriculum, but some of it delivered in English, and then the kind of international schools. So Chinese passport holders cannot attend international schools where they can run a full Cambridge curriculum all the way through to kind of A-levels or IB, including GCSEs, but they can attend a bilingual school which follows the Chinese national curriculum and offers them some level of Cambridge curriculum as long as they're meeting the Chinese national curriculum. I know that Vietnam operates a similar system. And more what you're finding now is that kind of governments are putting regulation in place so that it's not just a free-for-all. And I think that's very important, actually, because what we saw certainly in the last kind of 8 years or so, and again I talk from China perspective here because that's where I've been, is that it was just a kind of let's open a school, let's stick a name on it, stick the word international in the title, and we'll deliver what we want, and anyone can come here as long as they can pay the fees. So you have to look very carefully at what curriculum schools are offering and who is able to go to those schools, not necessarily in a financial sense, but in terms of the allocation in terms of passport, who can go there, because that does make a big difference to what curriculum has been delivered. And of course that will then impact you in terms of a teacher and what you can deliver and your career moving forward.
Okay. I'm conscious of time. We've got 3 more sections to go through this evening, and I'm sure people will start to think of questions. So Alex and Joe, the Middle East, you've mentioned China, big areas for international schools. How would colleagues apply? What is the best way for colleagues to apply and to look at different schools and see, is the application process the same? Is it going to be slightly different?
From my experience, I found, I found the application process pretty much the same as when I was applying for jobs in the UK, in that the majority of them are advertised on a specific website, I'm not dropping any names, but obviously ones that the majority of teachers will go to. And obviously with that now, I've seen it change in the past 10 or so years with the number of recruiters and recruitment companies who are also then offering that and working directly with schools. But the process of applying is pretty much the same. Your job gets advertised. They want you to fill out the application form, as well as then providing a cover letter, as it were, a letter of application. So that process for me, same. I think once you get past that and you're offered an interview per se, that's where it becomes different, because a lot of schools now at this moment in time, so from now probably through to January, and some have already done it, you're seeing huge interview fairs at hotels across big cities in England, where principals and heads of schools go and will just mass interview people at that time to therefore either go, yeah, we'll do something more, and it doesn't necessarily involve the traditional do a lesson, come and tour the school, because you haven't got that capability to do so. Some of them now, again, just more online. I've interviewed a host of people online, and it might be that you're saying to others, can you send me a video of your lesson? Or, can you send me your lesson plan? So technology has had a huge impact, I think, on being able to see the type of teacher we have, but also from an international perspective, it's really trying to sell yourself within that period and window of time with all the other people that are there. So to some extent, it's like herding cattle when you see these events in hotels, and that can be very off-putting or very different to what people are accustomed to in a traditional sense.
And less kind of almost personal, isn't it? You want to be wooed if you're a candidate, and it doesn't feel so much. Joe, sorry, you want to come in, I think, and say.
No, I was scratching my head. Don't worry.
All right, okay.
That's going in the classroom, isn't it? Is your hand up, or are you scratching your head?
I think Alex, from people come from the UK, for example, as you say, from a state point of view, they are expecting a process which, as you say, you teach a lesson, you go through a process of being seen. We can't do that in the international sector, as we know. Especially in the recent years of COVID and pandemic, and we've had to do so much online recruitment. I think sometimes there's a danger of trying to make a judgment on somebody, as us three know, and people on the screen know, based on this process. Whereas, you know, if you're seeing somebody for a day, spending some time with them, they're bound to slip up at some point in the staff room about, or you get the chance to be a bit more informal and ask them questions. I would also, I mean, from my point of view, you said about technology, you know, we say this all the time, but people's social media counts. The amount of people that we've found out not exactly being fully compliant with the truth, or bits and pieces in the CVs or resumes that aren't really there, or perhaps slightly exaggerated. I mean, we all want to show ourselves off in the best light. We've had a couple of people like that recently that we've been able to sort of spot and say they're not for us, they don't align with us, this isn't really what they're doing. Joe, would you, anything from your experience, anything else about how to apply for an international school, how to stand out, how to...
Well, I'm going to twist it on its head and look at it from a recruiter's point of view. So for me as a head, when I'm kind of, you know, filling a lot of positions, I think this is where the recruitment agents become really, really important to me, because they do a lot of that filtering for me and present me with candidates who they know will be a good fit for my school. So I think using recruitment agents such as TIC would be a really, really good opportunity to have those kind of you know, pre-conversations, you know, get the agent to know you really well, and then they can then advocate for you to a school, to a head, and say, look, I know you've got these positions to fill, this person would be really great for this. It saves me the time of going and spending, you know, hours and hours kind of, you know, reading through CVs and looking through applications. It's more directed in that way, that I'm getting sent the candidates that I know that are going to fit the bill because somebody's already done that for me. So I would recommend going through agents. Obviously, there's, you know, there's websites and you apply individually to schools. That usually involves lengthy application processes. So I think the agents are a really good way to go. And that's becoming more and more apparent. Certainly when I started many moons ago, you know, teaching internationally, there was nothing like that available. But it is now, and do use it, because it allows you to be pushed in the right direction, and for, you know, us as employers to get the right people on our desk, you know, as quick as possible.
Brilliant, lovely advice.
I would also, just very quickly, I would also advocate, you mentioned social media. Probably the first thing I do if I get CVs across my desk is I check them out on LinkedIn.
Absolutely.
And I'd say a lot of teachers now are either cottoning on to that fact, or are still going, what's that? I don't have that. Isn't that for?
Yeah.
And my biggest recommendation for anyone, if you are serious about it, is to get a LinkedIn profile and have it up to date, because it's turning almost into your sort of living, breathing, evolving CV. So I would highly, highly recommend that.
That's good advice, Alex. Brilliant. Amy, should we move on? Please put any questions in the chat if you have any. Amy should go to section 2. Okay, I had an interesting conversation recently with somebody who said, working abroad is career suicide. You'll never get back. It's not a proper career. It's where certain teachers go to have their swan songs, which of course is nonsense. The opportunities are phenomenal. I actually think everybody should have a spell abroad. And get that into their sort of CV and to build themselves and develop themselves. So what will your career look like internationally, from the point of view of the classroom, responsibilities, what the career progression could be, the opportunities, impact on yourself, personal and professional growth, skill development, diversification? What would an international career look like? Alex, Joe, you sat in front of many people and you're promising them why they should come to you. And part of that is, will they leave you better, ready for their next step? What does an international career look like? What would they look like?
Are you going to go, Alex?
I'm going to go for Joe this one. Let's jump to Joe.
Yeah.
I think first of all, the expectations internationally are far greater maybe than they are in your home country. Not necessarily a bad thing. You will work harder, but you'll work smarter. You'll learn new skills, and I think that's important. In terms of classroom structure and responsibilities, no, there are no unions overseas, or I'm basing this on a UK perspective here. So you will work longer hours. You will get called in on a Saturday, and there's you can't fall back on you and say no about that. But That's not
12, 9,
necessarily
6 hours or whatever.
yeah 1265. There's none of that. It's not necessarily a bad thing. I think what you find in an international community, and we'll talk about kind of like communities, I think a bit later on. But in terms of you put in what you get out, don't you? And career progression opportunities. And I just looking from a personal point of view, I entered the international scene, kind of 16 years ago as a teacher. Within a few years I was in senior leadership, and my career's just gone on that path there. Now that isn't necessarily what's going to happen to everyone. It's not necessarily the right pathway for everyone. What I've also seen in the time that I've been in international schools and leading international schools are some fantastic teachers who have remained as classroom teachers because they love it, they're passionate about it, and they're really good at it. And what they've had is the opportunity to excel in that area because they love it. And I think that isn't necessarily the case. Maybe, again, UK based, if they stayed in the UK, there's always that pressure to move forward because that's how you get up the pay scale. And I've seen wonderful examples of schools that kind of, allow people time allowances or honorariums to put projects into place and run through with those because they don't want to take on responsibility. So I think in terms of your personal and professional growth, we spoke about culture and exposure to that and traveling and seeing new things. I think it's a fantastic opportunity to take.
Right, I think that's a really good point, just to what you picked on there. And whereas in the UK, perhaps the only way to get a career is you've got to say that in 5 years' time I'll be a head teacher, or you've got to show this kind of strange ambition. I think there are a lot of opportunities. I've seen a lot of international careers that can actually go in a sort of lateral way. They can enjoy, as you say, just being in the classroom. Not everybody wants to. People go into teaching to teach. It's not all about, and as we know, as we go into the role of school leadership, it takes us quite a lot out of the classroom. It takes us into, especially in international schools, being private companies, into kind of more business ways of thinking, and the titles we have changed. We're not head teachers necessarily, but I think that's a really good point, that people's careers can be developed in sort of different ways, and some people don't want to be deputy head teachers or deputy principals or vice principals of pastoral or academic, and I think people need to get that as well. Whereas in the UK, of course, I do feel there's a big push on people. If you've got any kind of talent, you've got to be then pushed into leadership immediately, or as you said, with your own career, and I've seen it with people in my schools. We're quite young. We're the first international school in Moldova. It's been a privilege to see people develop and grow in a way that perhaps they wouldn't have had the opportunity in a more established, or as you say, there's no unions, there's none of that. I've sat in that seat for 20 years, or this is what the Burgundy book says, or so. There we go. Alex, what would you say? What would an international career look like working internationally?
So this is my 9th year now in Dubai, and I've worked across 3 different schools. And I vividly remember when I arrived and the school I was working at said, well, we're a premium school. I was just like, well, what does that mean? And they were like, well, put it this way, like, we don't have a photocopying budget. If you want to photocopy, color, whatever you want to do, you do as many as you want. And I was like, right, okay. And that dynamic has changed slightly. But in terms of classroom structure, the point to make from that is that often a lot of these are going like facilities, and what you have to work with is predominantly high end, because parents pay a lot of money for their children to go here. There's an expectation, and we need to provide that. We need to have the facilities. So things like, students having all their devices. I remember I have 2 young daughters. Well, I say they're not that young now, but from the age of, let's say, 5, maybe 6, it was like, bring your iPads to school, we're going to use those. And yes, the school provides them as well to some extent if needed, but these children are coming in with their own devices, and they're there throughout their learning career. And when you then go back to friends in the UK and you say, oh, it's not necessarily apples and apples to that extent in terms of, the money that's invested into the classroom and the structure that goes with that. On from that, then, in terms of career progression and professional development, like PD is something that I'm hugely, hugely passionate about. And the level of internet, say, guest speakers that you're likely to get in and around this area, and in any international school, if you're connected with them. So let's say at the moment with AI, I know Dan Fitzpatrick has recently just finished his 2nd tour of Dubai. and then people like Darren Coxon. And so from an AI's perspective, these schools will pay money to have these people come in. And so as a professional development perspective, you are exposed to, a lot of, present and current work with individuals at the forefront leading it. I think even at the start of this term, the company I work for, John Hattie, or Professor John Hattie, should I say, was there, and they had him around the schools. And so we're like, oh, wow. And so from that side of it, the schools value professional development and are happy to invest money into it and invest money into you to go off and do these things. And I've been very, very fortunate in that I've kind of been given my own, path to follow and things that I'm professionally and personally interested in. So I have an element of control over my growth and skill development. And what I would say, and I hark back to this onus on LinkedIn, is that once you get into an international school and for example in the UAE, those types of things are almost like brands. Like you as an individual, you are your own brand in that respect, and people come to a lot more of these professional learning networks and share and really value the output and input of what you give in that respect. And so that's probably kind of a different thing that teachers here kind of have to get used to, but actually it's a really valuable tool in terms of professional development and almost networking, because from an international school's perspective, it's quite a small community. And so wanting to move, you'll find that you're 6 degrees of separation of someone who's worked there or knows someone who works there or is going to go there. It's small in that respect. So the ability to network and then develop it's a high priority and something they invest into and something where you can really flourish and develop.
There's so many things you've said there. I just want to pick up on a conversation that I had today with an American teacher who's joined us from Seattle. It's his first time away. And we were talking about the Model United Nations Club, and I just forgot, and you sometimes, the culture that we're in. And he said, well, they want to do the MUN, and that's, we did it to New York in the spring. And I said, don't worry, so the parents will pay, it's not an issue. And I just found myself saying that, I thought, well, in the Forest of Dean 4 years ago, that trip would have had to be 2 years planned, fundraising. Here we've got, and I know that sounds really blasé, but as you say, sometimes we're in very different arenas now. And we're not apologizing for it, because that's one of the, from my point of view, that's a good benefit, that we can actually do this level of education. You talk about AI and different speakers and getting exposed to this. I also think back to what Teacher Tap have sort of come up with, the people in the UK want to come abroad for all sorts of reasons, but a lot of the reasons are to do with, they see they're going to get more freedoms as they come abroad, not to just not follow curriculum or to sort of have a sort of random chaos in the classroom, but actually some of the silly things that came in recent years in very controlled classrooms and very sort of strange micromanagement systems in schools, that doesn't exist. There is an ability and there's a sort of belief in professional autonomy, as long as people can exercise that and we develop that and we show how, we put that within the culture of a school, within the frameworks. I was also talking about when COVID hit, lots of people in the UK, certainly in England, the state schools didn't respond so well because they were waiting for government. They were waiting for an answer coming from London. International schools were really proactive. Right from the beginning, they knew they couldn't wait for answers. They started immediately. They'd already been developing skills like online learning, and that just transformed. And I know there was a big difference. My own daughters were educated in the state system in the UK at that point. And I know, the teachers work hard, but they didn't get direction, they didn't get leadership. And I think the international system did a much better job. But then there was almost a kind of reluctance to sort of follow what the international system does, because people in the state system, they don't want to talk too much about the international market. It doesn't join up well. COBIS have mentioned lots of times, and today I read that the Chartered College and COBIS are going to do more work together as partnership. That could be a good thing to actually bring the national and the international section together a lot more, and actually make this slightly more symbiotic, that you can have your career abroad, come back, and it's not a big deal. And maybe that's what's going to
happen. Because obviously I've spent the last kind of many years overseas, last 10 years in China. I'm back in the UK for a year right now for family reasons. We spent a long time in lockdown in China. I've come back to the UK just for 1 year before moving on to my next post. And I was worried that it would impact coming over here. And I've literally had supply agencies, because I only want to do supply, biting my hand off. And I'm in a school at the moment, and they said, well, we want to do a digital transformation. Can you help us with that? And so, even just, want to do 2 days a week, kind of just to kind of keep me out of trouble, as it were. I know I've got schools recognizing the work that's been done in international schools that I've been part of as a leader over there, and asking me to get involved in that in their school at the moment. So I think, I think it was one of the previous slide mentioned about, will it damage your career going international? Absolutely not. And I think it, it's now been seen as a real bonus, because the technology that we're using, the kind of the advances that we have in international education are not replicated, back again, UK as a base here, and so that's seen as a positive. And so don't worry about it ruining your career at all. See it as advancing it, and if you do decide that you want to go home at any point, well, there's opportunity there for you as well.
Joe, I was taken aside at my last meeting of Gloucester Heads, and I was on the committee there, and they were all saying career suicide. What the hell are you doing? It's career suicide. And I still remember that conversation. Really good guys I respect, and it was a bizarre one. And interestingly, when I went back to the UK in October to do some work with Global School Alliance, one or two of the same people just said, genius move. I said, I know, I told you, you should just go and you should do this. Salaries are important. We know that, I'm coming from Eastern Europe. We are benchmarked within our COBIS Black Sea Schools region. They're not going to be as high as I know that they would be in the Middle East. So what would we say here? To people, obviously, that's a big decider. People think they're going to get huge tax-free salaries in the Middle East and come back and buy a nice sort of Bath stone house in the Cotswolds. So salary is different. Alex, you're laughing. I've just caught on to your next career plans.
Yeah, that's it. I'm afraid I'm going to probably burst some people's bubbles with that, in terms of that is a real misconception. And it very much depends on your experience when you're coming out to teach. If you are a relatively new teacher, if you have a couple of years experience, then the salary you're going to see based on a comparison to inner London, outer London, anywhere in the UK is not massively different here. And this is, again, harking back, they're businesses, and so in terms of that, the schools, the package, in terms of the salary is probably about the same as what you would get in the UK. And what you're coming out to then is they'll probably provide you with an apartment, so you get your accommodation, you don't pay for that. But the cost of living here, and especially if you're coming over potentially as a youngish single teacher, it's very easy within Dubai and the UAE to get caught up with the Joneses, because you are going to see every day. And I'll give you a prime example of this. So we had 8 o'clock this morning, and we're just finishing our National Day celebrations. The teacher's band was playing, and the fire alarm goes off, and we're in the midst of drop off. So everyone has to go out into, obviously, the designated area, which is a car park. And there's a Ferrari just parked up, and they've got all these kids now going, this is in the spot I need to stand in to get to. And so it's there. You are going to be shown immense amounts of wealth from people. I think there's more millionaires in here, in Dubai especially, than anywhere else in the world. And it's like, from a teacher's perspective, you're not going to live up to that. No, if you're coming out middle leadership and beyond, and more experience in your career, then yes, you will start to see a significant difference in the pay package that comes with that, and the medical, the children's places, your housing allowance, everything goes with that. But it's something to be aware of, that, unless you're at that point, the comparison between, and this is from speaking from experience with friends who come and done 2 years and like, I'm better off in the UK. It's an often misconception that you're going to come and earn lots of money. It's like, yeah, you can do, but the thing to remember is a lot of these international areas are designed to make you spend money. And that's my experience from Dubai. It's definitely geared to make you spend money.
Okay. The wine is really nice, and it's cheap in Moldova. That's one of my selling points. But there we go. Joe?
Yeah.
No, exactly what I said there. It's, the cost of living ratio is really, really important, and I think you're right. There's this expectation, and maybe 10 years ago, we were all earning, massive amounts of money in the Middle East. I was in the Middle East 10 years ago, huge salary, and the bottom fell out of it. And, that doesn't happen anymore. But you have to look at what the salary is that you're getting, and not maybe compare it to the UK, because you need to look at what the cost of living is over there. I'd take a country like Vietnam, for example, which is very much developing country. Salaries tend to be, much lower on paper, over there. But then when you look at the fact you could live quite comfortably on, meal wise, for like $10 a day, you're in the top kind of 1% of the country earning as a teacher. I think it does come into play better when you maybe have got kids, later on in your career.
Yeah.
The fact that maybe you're not paying for school fees is huge, and obviously some places now, it used to be a standard you get free school places. That isn't the case anymore. Some places, I think it's due to tax law changes. Certainly in China it is, where they're not allowed to give you free school places. You may have to pay a small amount towards it. But even then, the saving that you're making by not having to pay for that level of education elsewhere is phenomenal. So do look carefully at the cost of living in relation to what you're getting and what your expenditure is as well. Don't have really high expectations. You're not going to drive a Ferrari. More's the pity.
No. I'm conscious of time, but I want a couple of points just off the back of that as well. Often, the further you are away, flights are more expensive. You can't just pop home. They might only be built into your salary annually. We've got low-cost airlines. It's probably cheaper to get back to the UK than it is to catch a train from London to Bristol, frankly. As you say, standard of living is often a good thing to look at. Teachers live very well in Moldova and this part of Eastern Europe with standards of living here. Things like pension, if you come out of the teacher's pension, that's a bit of a shock when you realise where that kicks in, and that isn't going to be something that you will necessarily have to get a contribution. You might do if you negotiate it. And tax is also, I personally, I'm double taxed because I spend more time in the UK. I actually negotiated time back in the UK to work from home as one of my conditions. That works for me personally, with my family, with commitments there, to work for things like the British Council, but it also means double taxation. And that was quite a shock to have. And so, as you say, comparatively, probably worse off financially here. Career-wise, life, even with everything that's gone on in the last few years, the war in Ukraine and all that as well. I feel awful saying that because Anna and I work together, and Anna can tell us about recruiting teachers for Kiev and their schools and how difficult that is. But on the whole, on balance, I wouldn't trade this for anything. This has been the challenge of a career, and I love it. And I love the school community. I love what we're doing. And that's what we've got. You've got to almost look holistically and bigger than perhaps some of the narrower things you would looking for a job maybe in the UK. Okay, what happens when we've talked about businesses, again, it might not run the way you think it does. People are in a shock when they don't get paid for having time off, or they've got to produce a doctor's note, or else they won't get paid for that. So those things, they are worth looking at. And as Alex said, maybe Saturday school, vacations, holidays might be different. Go on, Joe.
I think maternity leave is a really big one here. That's something that I've come across quite often, where people are really surprised when they come into me and say, "Oh, by the way, I'm pregnant," and they're used in the UK to have their extended leave, which is up to a year, kind of with so many months paid and then unpaid. 45 days if you're lucky. And hopefully your medical kind of coverage will cover a maternity package that you have to supplement. So things like that, I think you do need to be aware of, and do look into them carefully if you're planning to go down that route.
Very good point. Okay, Amy, I know we're conscious of time, and right there we go. This is a good one. Okay, I know we've kind of touched upon this. Choosing the right school location. My goodness, well, over 13,000 schools say they're international. Big areas of international schools. We've said in China, Middle East, Southeast Asia. Not so much in Eastern Europe. I notice a few colleagues now going towards Latin America more and more. Alex, what would you advise to somebody asking you the right school, right location?
Yeah, I think it's a challenging one. I think is the honest answer, isn't it? It's because there's there are now so many more schools, international schools, to choose from around the world, and it never used to be like that. And I think the first thing is to get right is potentially the location. And so we find one that's going to fit with the kind of lifestyle that you want to live. And I think that's an important part to go with it. We ended up in the Middle East because also at the same time, my wife's company were opening an office here. We knew we wanted to work and live internationally for a period of time. And for us, it was like, it's 7 hours back to the UK. It's not too far in that respect in terms of where we're at in the world. And that's something to bear into consideration. If you go, let's say, to Latin America, how long is it going to take you to get home if there's a family emergency? The same with China. It's like those types of things people don't consider. It's like, geez, and I consider myself relatively middle-aged now. But if something was to happen to my mum or a family member, what's going to happen? How long is it going to take me to go door to door? And that for me was a big consideration. But if that's not, this is the thing, and I'll be, with the teachers I've dealt with, it's like, actually, it doesn't matter where you start anywhere. I think actually just throw yourself into it and go, you know what, it's more about the school. That's what I want to. And actually, a lot of these international schools that we're seeing are becoming chains, are becoming franchises, and the ability to move from one to another in a different country actually is probably more alluring for some people. And we see that people will do 2 years in one country and then move to another country and do 2 years, but potentially within the same school brand. So I think in terms of the starting point, actually, just start. I think it's more important that you just start. Just throw yourself in and go, you know what, I'm going to apply for that one, and just to get my foot in and try it. You know what, and if I don't like it, I'll come back. But if I like it, it might be because I either like the country, the way of life, the people I've met. It might be that I like the school, and sometimes you don't get that. You get, I like the school, I don't like where I live, or vice versa. I like this country, but I don't like my school, and it's always going to have so many different variables.
The TIS recently was an article about India being the big growth area now, especially, Joe, what you said about sort of China changing towards international schools. What would you say here about choosing right school, right location, some of the things to consider?
I think one of the things that I've been very much aware of, two things actually. First one is, as Alex said, being able to get home quickly. While I was in lockdown in China, my dad passed away. And there was no way that I could travel back. I couldn't even leave my apartment to go and kind of walk the dog. That's very extreme circumstances, but it did make me very much aware of the fact that even if I had been able to travel, the length of journey to get back, flight up to Shanghai back to the UK, possibly a couple of stop-offs on the way, that was important. So I think do think about things like that. And when you go overseas, you've got to think about you kind of needs back at home, as it were. The other thing that I was aware of was medical care, which is when you go to Shanghai, Beijing, for example, the medical care is fantastic, way better. You've got your nice medical insurance card that your school have provided you with. Maybe 10% copay at some really fancy hospital, but direct billing at a pretty good hospital where everything's taken care of. You show that card, you get your treatment. But there are some places where you haven't got that, and again with kids, what's going to happen if it's a medical emergency? So I would look at things like that. Look at what your situation is, what's important to you. Have you got young children? What needs have they got? Have you got elderly parents back at home? What how likely is it you need to get back quickly, and how long is it going to take you? But other than that, I think your advice is absolutely right. Throw yourself in at the deep end. Consider those things and put yourself in. Go wherever you can and take that adventure wherever you can get it.
Wonderful. Amy, I know we've got some more to get through. Amy, should we go to the last section now, because I think this all ties in nicely. There we go. And I think, Joe, you've already touched upon this, preparing yourself to work internationally, what we need to do, what are the strategies we have to have. And I think, Joe, you've said this, Alex, you've said this. What's the right mindset? Perhaps things are going to be different. It's not, we've already mentioned, 12-6, 5 hours, Burgundy book, no unions, no kind of, or not necessarily unions, but actually working in diverse. If you come to work in Eastern Europe, and I've got some colleagues here this evening, the post-Soviet societies, they can be a joy. If you want mindless nonsense bureaucracy, come and be a head teacher in this part of the world. But it's changing, and that's the point, isn't it? And I sat with Anita Gleave recently at the Outstanding Schools Conference in February, who's Chatsworth School. We talked about the challenges they have in the Middle East and the schools in Saudi Arabia and what they're doing. So, you know, evolution does change. How do you prepare yourself? Some good points there about education qualifications, your certificates, and having the sort of the copies of that. We know with safer recruitment how strict that can be with apostilling stuff and police checks and all those kind of things. And any school that's going to do this properly will make sure they've got a very good safer recruitment process. If they're a COBIS school or a Council of International Schools, they will have gone through a rigorous process to make sure that they are hiring the good people. But we know people slip through the system, even in the strictest of safeguarding regimes. Building your teacher portfolio, making sure that you kind of you're not doing the same thing for the next 5 years. You are changing and taking on new challenges, as we said, the opportunity that present itself. Alex, Joe, I'm conscious I'm doing my bit at the end of my assembly, trying to cram everything into the last 5 minutes. Anything else to add here about preparing yourself to work internationally?
I think, sorry, Alex, do you want to go or may I?
No, you go.
Language, absolutely. Language. It's fine. No matter where you go, even if you only learn a few basic greetings, numbers, how to order, food, you have to learn the language. And the language also teaches you about the culture. And that's I think that I spent 10 years in China. My Chinese is okay. It's not great. But in what I have been able to learn in Chinese, it's actually opened my eyes to the culture a huge amount. I speak a mediocre amount of Arabic as well from my time over in the Middle East. I'm now moving on somewhere else. Now changed my Duolingo over, and I've got my lessons starting next week for my new language. And I think that's so important. And also to find, even if you don't, you can't communicate. You couldn't have five passes of a conversation. If you can just go in somewhere and say a few words and show that you're making an effort, that goes a huge way.
My local colleagues really appreciate it when internationals do this, and I've seen the most successful international teachers in my schools flourish because they are embracing that and they're willing to give it a go. The ones that want to go down to the American bar and never ever come out of the apartment, the school, or the American bar, they don't tend to have good experience. Amy, I'm conscious, should we move on to so we get some questions, or at least get some right. The all-important checklist, if you're coming from the UK, I think fairly standard. We talked about some of these now. Medicines, vaccinations.
If I can jump in here, because the first one there, these were slides that I put in, and I just wanted to talk about this. This is based on coming from the UK, but I think it's really important. First of all, the notarization and attestation of certificates. I've got a couple here to show you what you have to go through. So it's certainly coming from the UK, but from anywhere, you'll need to get your certificate, so your degree certificate, any qualifications you have, notarized and attested. It's a very complicated situation, and it's very expensive as well. So notarization, you send your original off, and then they give you a copy back with this rather funky little red ribbon on the front. This is the UK one. This little bit of paper and red ribbon and stamp costs about 150 quid. And then when you've got that, you send it off to the embassy of whichever country you're going to, and then they stick a really classy bit of A4 paper cut down on the back of it, saying that, this is a legal certificate. Yes, we recognize it's a legal certificate. Thank you very much. All your certificates will need to have that done, including your children's birth certificates, marriage certificates, everything else. And it's a really lengthy process. So if you were thinking of going overseas, I would suggest you get them notarized as soon as possible, because that could take up to 8 to 10 weeks, and then sit on them and wait until you know where you're going to, and then get the apostille certificate from the embassy. I think it's really important you can do that. Keep receipts for things, because a lot of schools will refund that for you. But do bear that in mind, because it takes a long time, and obviously the recruitment process is long anyway. You don't want to extend it any further. So if you're definitely going to go to a new country, get things notarized and then wait to get them apostillized when you know where you're going to. That was my first bit of advice.
Brilliant.
My second one was if you're leaving the UK and you've been paying taxes in the UK, for however long, make sure you fill out a P85 when you leave the UK. That will allow you to claim back tax relief and reimbursement of any tax that you pay up to date. So if you're paying through PAYE process, that's paid in lieu, kind of prorated over the year. So you'll probably get a good tax rebate, but it'll also allow you to kind of cancel any child benefit payments unless you're going to a country where you can still claim them. And do check that out, because there are number ones in Europe where you can still claim child benefit, and make sure that you kind of, deal with all the HMRC stuff, including what your obligations are with tax returns, even if you're not earning in the UK. I think, Robbie mentioned double taxation.
Yeah.
Do check with your bank before you leave what your IBAN and SWIFT numbers are. Okay, I made that mistake, and it was really hard to find them out once I left the country because it involved numerous phone calls at odd hours. But you'll need those to send money back to the UK. In terms of storage and shipping, bear in mind that a lot of countries will not allow you to get your shipping until you have your visa sorted. That can sometimes take 8 to 10 weeks after you arrive in the country. So whatever you're taking with you has to last you until your shipping arrives, which may be 8 to 10 weeks. And that's particularly pertinent with young children. I made that mistake myself with a 6-month-old and a kind of a 3-year-old, thinking we'll put everything in the shipping and we'll just carry light bags and then rock up, and we don't. And obviously, budget for those relocation costs as well. And then finally, just making sure that when you leave to go somewhere, you've got enough medication that you may take. Get 6 months worth. Do check that any medication that you take is actually legal in the country that you're going to. Licenses for various medications vary from place to place. So something you're maybe taking in the UK, for example, might not actually be legal in China. And so that might, do check that out beforehand, and obviously getting your vaccinations up to date as well. That was my little checklist. There you go.
That's really good advice. That's brilliant. I'm going to actually use that one. I like that. Thank you, Jo. Amy, should we go on to is this your slide as well, Jo? This last one.
It is. Yeah, it
there
is.
We go. Floor is yours.
Should I carry on? Okay. So obviously, when you arrive, now hopefully your school will take care of all of these things for you, but sometimes, certainly with COVID, we had extreme circumstances, or you might be arriving before everyone's back from holiday if you just want to get out there. But think about what you're going to need for the first few weeks. I mentioned about medication and your shipping not being there, things like that. Get a local SIM card as soon as you arrive. That's really important, obviously, to cut your costs as well, but also a lot of the apps that you might use for getting around, like Grab or kind of Didi, won't work unless you have a local kind of phone number. So do get a local SIM card as soon as possible. Check out where your nearest supermarket, your bank, your hospital, things like that, and get, certainly with the hospital and the doctor's surgery, get those addresses and numbers saved into your phone, pin those locations on your maps as well, so you've got them. Look up any expat support groups before you go over there, because they will become your support network. You won't have your family and your friends nearby, so your school becomes your family, and those expats in your area do become your family, and you rely on them heavily. And what you'll find is actually they're the most welcoming people ever, because they've all been through the same process as well. They've arrived somewhere new and they've had people take them in, and so that they'll welcome you with open arms, and hopefully you will become part of that process of welcoming someone else later on. And then finally, I think just mentally this is important. Check out the entry requirements of friends and family who want to visit, so you can arrange a visit. So if you're arriving in the August, make sure you've got someone set up to come over in the November, because that will make a real big difference. Because we all know about the lows and highs of moving somewhere new, and 1 minute everything's great, the next minute you're missing your Marmite and toast, and the bottom's going to fall out of the world. But if you know that somebody's going to come over and see you in kind of October half term, whatever, that makes a huge difference. But do check what their entry requirements are, in order for them to come and visit you first.
Wonderful. The Irish consul gave me mince pies the other day from the International Charity Bazaar, and I was so happy with my cup of tea. Lipton's yellow. I'll get
Lipton's yellow cream. Goodness me.
I know. I might do an entire presentation, a TS ask on Lipton's yellow tea. Amy, I'm conscious of time because I think we've just come, and there might be questions, but I'm going to hand it back to you because you've got some things to take us through that you need to get across as well.
Thank you for Rob, and thank you, Jo, for your very practical and comprehensive advice. And thank you so much, Alex. And for all our attendees, if you want to improve your awareness towards international school life and international school leaders, I think it will be great for you to follow us on the website with our LYIS podcast and the principals blog, as well as newsletters. And you can find our website with leadingyourinternationalschool.com. Oops. And here are the contacts for our extraordinary guests today. Let me know if you can see the QR codes. I just quickly move the...
I was so proud when I followed your advice today in the WhatsApp group and found how to do QR codes on LinkedIn. And that was my big achievement of the day.
Yeah, thank you, Alex, for that, because I had no idea either.
And put them on CV.
But everyone's saying Alex has LinkedIn lessons right now.
There's a free app you can get that it will hold all your contacts actually and puts it into it for you. I'll send that through in the group as well. It's pretty cool to have.
Thank you.
And here is our LYIS upcoming book, Starting Your International School. So in January 2024, we do have a leadership course, Becoming an International School Principal. You can find more information if you just scan the sign up QR code. Right, so at the end, I'm going to show you two QR codes about our WeChat channel. If you are in China or if you use WeChat, you can simply scan and follow us, and you receive all the informations about international schools, leaders, what an international school life look like. And here's our LinkedIn QR code. The same procedure, you scan us, you can find us on LinkedIn and receive the updates. Thank you again for our 3 extraordinary guests today. And thank you so much for your time. And thank you for attending us, all the attendees. If there are any questions, please type in the chat. I'll just hold the meeting for now.
If I may add, so thank you everyone for this insightful discussion. So my name is Anna. I'm a communications lead at the British International School in Ukraine. And as Rob mentioned before, we still need more international teachers working with us on site. So we have some fantastic guys who chose to stay with us. One gentleman, Alex, Rob knows him. He comes from Yorkshire. So another gentleman, US-born gentleman, as a volunteer, joined us in Dnipro. So, we have found really some teachers who are willing to join us maybe later this year after the Christmas. So if you know somebody who is really just willing to make their contribution to Ukraine and support us and come over, just send them over to us. And believe me, so